Okay, to be fair, I've had a few drinks. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish the chapter. So, up there. Oh, my reading skills may have diminished slightly. It's like the longest chapter of any book I've ever read. And it's like 90 pages long. Not a lot of chapters, but they're long as hell. It was dusk when they began searching blindly through all of Florid City. Dusk a day before the wedding. Count Rugen was about to begin his nightly experiments at that dusk, gathering up his notebooks from his room, filled with all of his jottings, 5 levels underground. Behind the castle walls, locked and chained and silent, Wesley waited beside the machine. In a way, he still looked like Wesley, except, of course, that he had been broken. 20 years of his life had been sucked away. 20 were left. Pain was anticipation. Soon, the Count would come again, against any wishes he had left. Wesley went on crying. It's not very manly, Wesley. It was dusk when Buttercup went to see the prince. She knocked loudly, waiting, and knocked again. She could hear him shouting inside. And it had not been so important that she would never have knocked the third time, but she did. The door was yanked open, and the look of anger on his face immediately changed to the sweetest smile. "Beloved," he said, "come in. A moment more is all I need," and he turned back to Yellen. "Look at her, Yellen. My bride-to-be. Has any man ever been so blessed?" Yellen shook his head. "Am I wrong, do you think, to go to any lengths then to protect her?" Yellen shook his head again. The prince was driving him crazy with his stories of the Gilder infiltration. Yellen had every spy he had ever used working day and night, and not one of them had come up with anything about Gilder. Yet the prince insisted inwardly. Yellen sighed. It was beyond him. He was simply an enforcer, not a prince. In fact, the only remotely disturbing news he had heard since he closed the thieves' quarter that morning was within the hour, when someone told him that a rumor of a ship of the dread pirate Roberts had perhaps been sailing all the way into Florin Channel itself, but not, but such a thing. Yellen knew from long experience was simply rumor. "I'll tell you they are everywhere, these Gilder," the prince went on, "and since you have seemed unable to stop them, I wish to change some plans. All the gates have been sealed to my castle except for the front one, yes. Yes, and 20 men guard it. Add 80 more. I want 100 men, clear? 100 men will be, every brute available. Inside the castle I'm quite safe. I have my own supplies, food, stables enough. As long as they cannot get at me, I will survive. These, then, are the new and final plans. Jot them down." Oh. "All 500th anniversary arrangements are canceled until after the wedding. The wedding is tomorrow at sunset. My bride and I will ride my whites to Florin Channel surrounded by all your enforcers. Then we will board a ship and begin our long-awaited honeymoon, surrounded by every ship in the Florin Armada." "Every ship but 4," Buttercup corrected. He blinked at her a moment in silence. Then he said, "Blow your kiss," but discreetly so Yellen couldn't see. "Yes, yes, how forgetful am I. Every ship but 4. He turned back to Yellen, but in his blink that was following silence, Buttercup had seen it all. "Those ships will stay with us until I deem it safe to release them, of course. Gilder could attack then, but this is a chance we must risk. Let me think if there's anything else. The prince loved giving orders, especially the kind he knew would never need, need carrying out. Also, Yellen was a slow jotter. With that, he added to the fun. Excuse the prince said finally. With a bow, Yellen was gone. The 4 ships were never sent, Buttercup said when they were alone. Don't bother lying to me anymore. Whatever was done for your own good, sweet pudding. Somehow I do not think so. You're nervous, I'm nervous. We're getting married tomorrow. We've got the right to be. You couldn't be more wrong, you know. I'm very calm. And in truth, she did seem that way. Doesn't matter whether you sent the ships or not. Wesley will come for me. There is a God, I know that. And there is love, and I know that too. So Wesley will save me. You're a silly girl. Now go to your room. Yes, I am a silly girl. And yes, again, I will go to my room. And you are a coward with a heart filled with nothing but fear. The prince had to laugh. The greatest hunter in the world, and you say I'm a coward? I do indeed. I'm getting so much smarter as I age. I say you are a coward, and you are. I think you hunt only to reassure yourself that you are not what you are, the weakest thing ever to walk the earth. He will come for me, and then we will be gone. And you'll be helpless for all your hunting. Wesley and I are joined by the bond of love, and you cannot track that, not with 1,000 bloodhounds, and you cannot break it, not with 1,000 words. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, ripping at her autumn hair, yanking her from her feet and down the long curving corridor to her room, where he tore that open and through her. That was one ugly ass prince. Hey, looks more like a monk. I wouldn't marry that guy. Dude's ugly. His fucking eyeballs. Yeah. One more look at this dude. Like the menacing brow. You imagine that on a bed with him? Ugh. Whatever. Inside locked her there and started running from underground entrance to the Zoo of Death. I don't know if I feel like reading the lies, but man, we don't have that much left, so maybe I'll just read this one. Whatever. My father stopped reading. Go on, I said. Lost my place, he said, and I waited there, still weak with pneumonia and wet with fear, until he started reading again. Inigo allowed Physic to open the door. Hey, I said, hold it. That's not right, you skipped. And then Quick caught my tongue because we just had that scene where I got all upset about Buttercup marrying Humperdinck when I accused him of skipping, and I didn't want to repeat of that. Daddy, I said, I don't mean anything, but wasn't the prince sort of running towards the zoo? And then the next thing he said was about Inigo, and maybe I mean, should there be a page or like that in between? My father started to close the book. I'm not fighting. Please don't close it. It's not for that, he said. And he looked at me for a long time. Billy, he said. Almost never called me that. I loved it when he did. Anybody else, I hated it. But when the barber did it, I don't know. I just melted. There's no Morgan Street. So his dad didn't read him the book. So this is all lies. If you're not Cupcake watching this, then like you probably don't get it. The author is just like a master liar that fabricated this being based off of a old historical book, and even Cupcake thought it was like real, and then we like looked into it, and it's just like this crap he invented to make the story more. I don't know what his plan was, but he just invented. So if it's not It's just a bunch of crap by this author. I don't know the point of this. Anyway. Do you trust me? What is that? Of course I do. Billy, you got pneumonia. You're taking this book very serious. I know because we already fought about it once. I'm not fighting anymore. Listen to me. I never lied to you. You're lying to all of us, asshole. Okay, trust me. I don't want to read you this chapter, and I want you to say it's all right. Why? What happens in the rest of the chapter? If I tell you, I could accomplish the same by reading, just say okay. I can't say that until I know what happens, but tell me what happens. I'll tell you if that's okay. I promise I don't want you to hear it or skip onto Inigo. You won't do me this favor. I'll sneak out of my bed when you're asleep. I don't care when you hide the book that doesn't exist. I'll find it and I'll read the chapter myself that doesn't exist, so you might as well tell me about the book that doesn't exist, Billy, please, in the conversation that never existed. I got you. You might as well admit it. My father sighed his terrible sound. I knew I'd beaten him. Wesley dies, my father says. I said, what do you mean Wesley dies? You mean dies? My father nodded. Prince Humperdinck kills him. He's only faking it, right, though? My father shook his head, closed the book all the way. Oh, S-word, I said, and started to cry. I'm sorry, my father said. I'll leave you alone. Then he left me. Who gets Humperdinck? I screamed after him. He stopped in the hall. I don't understand. Who kills Prince Humperdinck? At the end, somebody's got to get him. Is it Physic? Who? Nobody kills him. He lives. You mean he wins, Daddy? What did you read to me this thing for? I buried my head in my pillow and I never cried like that again, not to this day. I always feel my heart emptying into my pillow. I guess it's the most amazing thing about crying, though, is when you're not much of a man either, crying like that. You think I'm but never really last half of what you think, not in terms of real life, in terms of real emotions. It's worse than you think, but not by the clock. When my father came back, it couldn't have been even an hour later. So he said, shall we go on tonight or not? Shoot, I told him. I try not to catch nothing, fire when ready. With Inigo? Let's hear about the murder, I said. I knew I wasn't about to bawl again. Like Buttercup. My heart was now a secret garden and the walls were very high. Moving on to the story. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, ripping at her autumn hair, yanking her down to her room, threw her inside. Like there and started running to the zoo of death. Yeah. And down he plunged, giant stride after giant stride, and when he threw the door of the fifth level cage open, even Count Rugen was startled at the purity of whatever the emotion was reflected in the prince's eyes. The prince moved toward Wesley. She loves you, the prince cried. She loves you still, and you love her, so think of that. Think of this too, in all the world you might have been happy, genuinely happy. Not one couple in the century has that chance. Not really, no matter what storybooks say. But you could have had it, and so I would think no one will ever suffer a loss as great as you. And with that, he grabbed the dial and pushed it all the way forward, and the Count cried, not to 20. But by then it was too late, and the death scream had started. It was much worse than the scream of the wild dog. In the first place, the dial for the wild dog had only been set to 6. Whereas this was more than triple that. So naturally enough, it was more than 3 times as long, and more than 3 times as loud. But none of this really is why it was worse. It was the scream of a human throat that made the difference. In her chamber, Buttercup heard it, and it frightened her, but she had not the least idea what it was. By the main door of the castle, Yellen heard it, and it also frightened him, though he couldn't imagine what it was either. All the 100 brutes and fighters flanked by the main door heard it too, and to a man they were bothered by it, and they talked over for quite a while, but none of them had any notions of what might have been. The great square was filled with common people, excited about the coming wedding and anniversary, and they all heard it too, and no one even made the pretense of not being scared. But again, none of them knew at all what it might have been. The death scream rose higher in the night. All the streets leading to the square were also filled with citizens, all trying to crowd into the square, and they heard it. But once they admitted that they were petrified, they gave up trying to guess what it might have been. Inigo knew immediately. In the tiny alley that he and Physic were trying to force their way through, he stopped remembering. The alley that led to the streets that led to the square, and the alleys were jammed too. I don't like that sound, Physic said, his skin for the moment cold. Inigo grabbed the giant, and words began pouring out. Physic, Physic, that is the sound of ultimate suffering. I know that sound. It is the sound in my heart when Count Rugen slaughtered my father, and I saw him fall. The man in black makes it now. You think that's him? Who else has cause for ultimate suffering this celebration night? And with that he started to follow the sound. But the crowds were in his way, and he was strong, but he was thin, and he cried, Physic, Physic, we must track that sound. We must trace it to its source, and I cannot move, so you must lead me. Fly, Physic. This is Inigo begging you. Make a path, please. Well, Physic had rarely had anyone beg him for anything, least of all Inigo. If something like that happened, you did what you could, so Physic, without waiting, began to push forward lots of people. Physic pushed harder. Lots of people began to move out of Physic's way, fast. The death cream was starting to fade now, fading into the clouds. Physic, said Inigo, all your power now. Down the alley Physic ran, people screaming and diving to get out of the way. At his footsteps, Inigo kept pace. At the end of the alley was a street, and the scream was fainter now, but Physic turned left and into the middle of the street. He went, he owned it. No one was in his way, nothing dared block his way, and the screaming was getting just so hard to hear. So with that might, Physic roared, quiet! And when the street was suddenly hushed, Physic pounded along, Inigo right behind, and the scream was still there, still faintly there, and into the great square itself, and the castle beyond before the scream was gone. Wesley lay dead by the machine. The prince kept the dial by 20 mark, long after it was necessary, until the count said done. The prince left without another look at Wesley. He took the secret underground stairs 4 at a time. She actually called me a coward, he said, and then he was gone from sight. Count Rugen started taking notes. Then he threw his quill pen down. He tested Wesley briefly, then he shook his head. Death was not any intellectual interest to him at all. When you were dead, you couldn't react to pain, the count said. Dispose of the body. Because even though he couldn't see the albino, he knew the albino was there. It was really a shame. He realized he mounted the stairs after the prince. You just don't come across victims like Wesley every day of the year. When they were gone, the albino came out and pulled the cups from the corpse, decided to burn the body on the garbage fire behind the castle, which meant a wheelbarrow. He hurried up the underground stairs, came out the secret entrance, moved quickly to the main tool shed. All the wheelbarrows were buried back in the rear wall, behind the hose, rakes, and hedge trimmers. The albino made a hissing sound of displeasure, and he began to pick his way past all the other equipment. This kind of thing always seemed to happen to him when he was in a hurry. The albino hissed again, extra work all the time. Wouldn't you just know it? Yeah, I do. He finally got the barrow out, and he was just passing the false and deadly supposed main entrance to the zoo when, having the devil's own trouble tracking that scream, was spoken to him, and the albino whirled to find there in the castle grounds a blade-thin stranger with a sword in his hand. The sword suddenly flickered its way at the albino's throat. Where is the man in black? The swordsman said then. He had a giant scar slanting down each cheek and seemed like no one to trifle with. Whispered, I know no man in black. Did the scream come from that place? The fellow indicated the main entrance. Nod. And the throat it came from. I need this man, so be quick, whispered Wesley. Inigo reasoned, the sailor, brought up here by Rugen. Nod. And I reach him where? The albino hesitated, then pointed to the deadly entrance. Whispered, he is on the bottom level, 5 levels down. Then I have no more need for you. Quiet him for a while, Physic. From behind him, the albino was aware of the giant shadow moving. Funny, he thought, the last thing he remembered, I thought that was a tree. Inigo was on fire now. There was no stopping him. Physic hesitated by the main door. Why would he tell the truth? He's a zookeeper, threatened with death. Why would he lie? That doesn't follow. I don't care, Inigo said sharply. And in fact, he didn't. He knew in his heart that the man in black was down there. There was no other reason for Physic to find him. For Physic to know a virgin, for everything to be coming together after so many years of waiting. If there was a God, then there was a man in black waiting. Inigo knew that. He knew it. And of course, he was absolutely right. But again, of course, there were so many things he did not know. The man in black was dead, for one. At the entrance. And there is a dead Wesley. Yeah. Even in death, that dude looks better than the prince. Hmm. The entrance they were taking was the wrong one, for another a false one, set upon to foil those like himself who did not belong. There were spitting cobras down there, though they would actually come at him would be worse. These things he did not know either, but his father had to be revenged, and the man in black could figure out how. That was enough for Inigo, and so with urgency that would soon turn into deep regret, he and Physic approached the Zoo of Death. That is the end of Chapter 6. We will pick up later with Chapter 7, The Wedding.